My life was devastated by my parents, who treated my sister like their only child and me as their unwanted child. I'm publishing this since without it, I am unable to make my update. Other than adding this caption, it hasn't been changed at all. Before the Entitled Parents moderators erased it, it was precisely as it was. I knew I had to share my own story after reading one identical to this one online. I figured sharing it might make me feel a bit better, so this will be my one and only Reddit post. Talking about this in particular helped a lot in my counseling sessions, so I figured there was no harm in sharing it online as well. Thus, I am. This year, I turned 18, and I moved away from my parents not too long ago. My sister is roughly 10 years my junior. Her pregnancy was unplanned, and she almost didn't go to term. I was never told much about how difficult my mother's second pregnancy was, so I don't know many specifics. But I do know that it was so difficult on her body that once my sister was born, my mother was unable to conceive. That year, she spent a lot of time in and out of the hospital. Not only did my mother almost not make it through the birth, the fact that my younger sister might not have been born caused her and my father to get attached to her. I've felt like the other kid in the house ever since, save for the times when they needed a free babysitter. My belief is that my parents were mentally ill for failing to recognize the long-term effects of their extreme favoritism for me, and now it's coming back to haunt them, as I shall tell in this piece, beginning with my 11th birthday. My sister was 2 years old and would cry at the sight of a birthday cake that wasn't hers, so her parents asked me to let her blow out my candles. My parents had me do it even though I didn't want to. They relit the candles so I could repeat the process after her, but it felt like the entire event had been wrecked. The following year, the year after that, and so on and so forth, saw the same thing occur. All they did was push it till it was standard procedure. On my birthdays, my sister had to receive gifts as well. When I questioned why I never received any on hers, they simply replied that since I'm a boy, boys shouldn't worry about it as much. Did they truly believe it was a wise thing to say? I know I was a kid, not really. On my birthday, my parents would always select a location that my sister would like above mine. It eventually got to the point where I had no birthdays while my sister had two. To tell the truth, my parents lived their whole lives in anticipation of my sister. My sister had to agree with me on anything I wanted to do. Otherwise, it would be rejected unless I could do it on my own. My sister didn't seem to disturb me in my room when I was playing video games, so I learned to just shut myself in there when she wanted to annoy me. That's the reason I locked the door. I freaked out because I was an angry teenager who was tired of having my privacy invaded at any time, even if my parents asked me to take it down. My parents were angry with me for being nude in my own room, and on multiple occasions my sister came storming in when I was completely naked. They backed down and let me keep the lock when I pointed out how ridiculous it was. Being treated every day and having high expectations for herself caused my sister to get quite the princess mentality. I used every excuse I could think of to avoid having to interact with her, even if it meant making up stories in order to avoid her company and have some alone time. I had more alone time because my parents had a teenage girl watch me. After that, the nanny left because my sister would not listen to her, and my parents attempted to avoid having to pay by claiming the nanny did a poor job. My parents ultimately paid the girl what they owed her after she convinced a few other individuals to get involved. Then they employed a second girl, who stayed, to watch the kids on a regular basis. I tried my best to keep myself occupied at my part-time work, but my parents insisted that I was to watch my sister whenever I had free time. My sister gave me directions and regarded me as her personal butler. She even gave me a ridiculous nickname that she wouldn't quit. The mere mention of that moniker makes me shiver. She would weep and call our parents if I didn't give in to her demands, and then I would have to deal with the consequences of mistreating her. This resulted in numerous heated disputes between my parents and myself, and eventually, when I refused to give in anymore, our communication ceased entirely. Nevertheless, they had the audacity to boast to other parents that I worked so hard because of them when I graduated from high school. They weren't entirely off, but the explanation they had in mind was different from the one that actually occurred. I put a lot of effort into my work, just waiting for my freedom, but my parents pretended to be quite accomplished. Perhaps they had before the birth of my sister, but later, everything revolved around her. It wasn't until parent-teacher conferences that they asked me about school. Despite the fact that the trip was meant to be for me, my parents basically took me to a spot where my sister would always have more fun than me when I graduated with a B and C average. But things really came to the surface in July, when I turned 18. It didn't feel at all like it was about me, even though it was my 8th. For once, I prayed to God that we would be dining at my favorite restaurant, but alas, No. The only venue similar to it in the vicinity is the local imitation Chuck E. Cheese, where they had the celebration. Thus, it became the unofficial site of celebration for any significant accomplishment, such as my high school graduation. Yes, I did mention that my sister would love this place more than I would. Encircled by youngsters half my age attending parties, I was utterly bored with nothing to occupy my time but play arcade games, eat subpar pizza, and earn tickets for inane prizes. When cake time finally arrived, my parents brought out a pink cake decorated with white flowers. It was clearly not a boy's cake, even though it bore my name. There were just 10 candles. My sister was directly in front of my parents when they lit the candles and let them go out. That is when it ultimately transpired. I started crying uncontrollably after having this mental flashback of all the hate that had been stored up. There I was, an 18-year-old boy bawling in front of the entire family. Time appeared to stop for everyone since they were all so shocked. When I stood up, everything that I had been suppressing for the previous 8 years suddenly poured out of me like verbal diarrhea. This was something that the whole family saw, and when it was eventually over, I went outside and sat by the family car. Following me were a few relatives who apologized and said they were unaware of the pink cake because my parents had kept it covered until it was served. I argued that their ignorance was irrelevant. For the last 8 years, they have all just watched as Little Miss Sunshine has taken over my life. My birthdays and other events were all about her. I didn't really have any of my own. Then, on the most significant birthday of my life, they all expected me to do nothing more than nod and smile as usual while they gave my sister a cake that was meant only for her, even though it wasn't her birthday. A few of them began apologizing to me, but their justification was that they had assumed I was all right with it because my parents had stated so. My parents pressed it on me every year until I just pretended to accept it, even though I informed them I was never okay with it. I threw out my arms and motioned for you to look where we were. Is this the location where I wanted to celebrate turning 18 and my graduation? After all this time, no one has even attempted to defend me. My sister has it all, and I'm simply the other kid. My parents stopped allowing me to invite my friends a long time ago after they tried to voice their objections about my sister getting to blow out my candles, so I never even got to have any of my friends there. Was it really so horrible of a desire for one of the 365 days of the year to be about me and not her? Instead, because I want my own birthday, I'm treated like the entitled, avaricious brat. I simply started bawling ugly again after that. By then, my mother was sobbing too, so my father had come outside to scold me for creating such a big deal out of nothing. My sister was angry that I had destroyed her moment and that everyone there now believed they were awful parents. In the end, I yelled at him, telling him why he should know exactly why they are bad parents. The rest of the family surrounded him like a pack of wolves when I said that. I guess it's better late than never, but this is unlike anything I've ever seen. The majority of the mob followed my father inside to confront my mother when they had virtually backed up to the restaurant's front entrance. My grandparents came to stay with me and expressed regret for keeping their eyes closed for so long. It was around 30 minutes after they left the restaurant, and I have no idea what was spoken to my parents, and they appeared utterly defeated when they finally did. Neither of my parents could look me in the eyes, and my mother was still sniffling from the intense crying. After clumsily admitting their mistakes, they both proposed to reschedule the celebrations somewhere else. However, that was clearly insufficient for the throng. My parents swore they would never force me to let my sister blow out my candles again, give her presents on my birthday, or make any aspect of it about her. One of my uncles ahemed pretty loudly. Another ahem occurred, and my parents also expressed regret for purchasing a cake that was clearly not intended for me, saying that they simply thought that at my age, I wasn't concerned about cakes anymore. Whoa, that was a bad thing to say. I lost my temper again and shouted at them that it didn't matter how old I was. They knew that they'd given my sister my birthday without any valid explanation. Then I stated that it was too late to throw another party, so there was no point. They made it rather evident that they don't care about me. My 8 years of childhood and adolescence were destroyed by them. What birthdays in the future could I possibly look forward to with them? My father was upset with me for saying so, but he stopped talking when the rest of the family yelled at him. "I'm exactly right," my grandfather informed him. "The damage done can't be undone at this point." He claimed that ever since my sister was born, my parents have been terrible people who have favored me and made me feel like the outsider. Furthermore, they should all be held accountable for their own terrible actions as well. Therefore, I deserve much more than simply an apology. My life was due to me again. My mother sobbed and tried to hug me again, calling me by name and expressing her regret, but I wouldn't allow her near me, and the other half of the family physically barred her approach. I simply responded that I had had enough and turned to leave. I got lost and was found by one of my aunts. Even though I could hear my parents being yelled at and cursed at by other family members for what had transpired, I was so angry that I wasn't even thrilled that my parents had finally received some justice. And during all of this, where was my sister? She remained alone in the restaurant, devouring cake and tearing into gifts that were intended for me. In case you were wondering, when I sobbed and left, my parents did indeed offer her some cake. You would imagine that wasn't their main priority at the time, but they were later called out for it. After calming me down, my grandparents made me sit in their ancient minivan as the others dispersed from the celebration. When my sister realized she was going to have to unwrap all of my presents, including a brand new smartphone that she was not permitted to keep, she flung it against the wall and destroyed it. She then had a major meltdown. Only a few months ago, on her own birthday, did she receive a brand new phone. After I became so angry that I was swearing I would never celebrate my birthday again, my grandparents allowed me to spend the night at their place. I still didn't talk to my folks when I got home. My father was just as reticent as I was, and my mother would just not stop crying because I wouldn't talk to her. My grandparents talked me into going out to dinner with them the next weekend, and when we arrived, I was shocked to see a brand new party waiting for me. My parents were present, and they maintained their "they don't hate us" expressions for the most part of the event. There was a large chocolate cake with 18 candles on top, and my name was even written on a banner. I didn't actually receive either this year, so they termed it my happy, belated birthday graduation party. It was kind of like I had to fake happiness. Really, one great party doesn't even come close to undoing 8 years of favoritism. Furthermore, where was my sister? It wasn't all about her anymore. So she curled her lip and folded her arms while seated at the table, and they sang a modified version of Happy Day instead of Happy Birthday for me. My sister shrieked as soon as I blew out the candles. I mean, a little girl's scream was so loud it hurt my ears. My parents had to hurry her out, and when they returned a little while later, she appeared even more distraught. For the remainder of the gathering, she sulked silently in her chair. In addition, I received a new smartphone, and my sister was also given one back for her actions at the last celebration. However, it wasn't just the smartphone. My automobile was a gift from the entire family. Even though it was only an outdated white Volvo, I fell in love with it as soon as I saw it. My granddad fixed it himself and has a good understanding of automobiles. My sister let out another of those screams, so obviously she wasn't as delighted as I was. She began throwing a fit and demanding a car as well. They went into the bathroom, where my mother had to take her, and they didn't come out for some time. My father simply returned to his dejected expression. In a sense, my sister had undone their best effort to appear presentable to the entire family. My parents also made it clear to other family members that my sister was behaving out because they brought her up to be a spoilt brat and princess. Naturally, I immediately began to drive the car around. But a few days later, my sister really destroyed it by smashing 2 of the side windows with a hammer and cracking the glass to the point that the vehicle could not be driven. Before she could do any more harm, my parents were able to stop her, but not before she screamed bloody murder at them when they grabbed her and took the hammer away, then attempted to bite them. Oh, my sister had really upset everyone, especially my grandparents, who had worked so hard on that car, and she had completely destroyed it with her tantrum. My sister couldn't even begin to understand that I could have something that she couldn't because my grandparents had indulged her so much. And a number of other relatives chastised my parents for creating an entitled brat in my sister, who expects the world to be handed to her, thereby setting her up for failure. And because they won't step in and show her some respect, she will have a horrible adult existence. My sister received consequences for her behavior. She was grounded for the remainder of the summer and sent to boarding school as of the start of the new academic year. Even though my mother sobbed uncontrollably, my father insisted that it was the best way to begin repairing the harm they had caused. Yes, they admit their mistakes wholeheartedly. They found it difficult to resist as nobody took any side. At that school, my sister is utterly miserable. She has been lying nearly non-stop, and she detests the rules and the outfits. These days, though, cameras are practically everywhere, so she's not getting away with much. She merely screamed at our parents for placing her in that situation when they attempted to visit her a few times. I've heard that she might attend this school till she is 18. My automobile was fixed by my folks. The windows and windshield were replaced by an auto glass firm, and the vehicle now has the same appearance as before. My grandfather approached me in August and said that if I was interested suggested he could find me a job working for a friend, but that I would have to move out of my parents' house if I wanted to make the 40-mile drive. I was all for relocation. However, finding a first apartment wasn't that simple. I had to be accepted for a studio before I could be allowed for a credit card, but I was accepted and have been living here since September. My folks are always contacting me, but I don't talk to them very much. I just feel uncomfortable and weird when we do talk. According to what my grandfather has said, they just don't want to admit how poor of parents they were, and they think that by asking for my forgiveness, they would feel better about themselves. However, I won't be pardoning you anytime soon. I'm at last content and free of them. They currently have nothing. They had lost both my sister and me, and because my sister's boarding school is expensive, my parents had to work longer hours, not to mention the auto repairs I had to have, or the party they had to arrange for me. All that's left of them is their work. Their families are furious, and the house is empty. Although it doesn't make me happy and feels like extreme suffering, it is ultimately the outcome of their own acts. Edit. I want to express my gratitude to everyone for the honors. It truly means a lot to me that I've received it. I apologize for the lengthy message. I simply had to get everything out, and now that I have, I feel much better. A few people in the comments have referred to this piece as false in different ways. You are not at fault, in my opinion. If I were in your position, I would read this with great skepticism and have similar questions, yet I experienced it. Some parents are just that way by nature. Additionally, I've received messages from a couple folks who experienced comparable, if not worse, circumstances. Is what my parents did really so unbelievable, given all the awful parents in the world? To be sure, it seemed a bit much for the entire family to rush back into the restaurant to speak with my dad, but I come from a close-knit family where we spend a lot of time together and do things as a group. Furthermore, it is quite easy for it to escalate to a meeting where everyone is against one person. I witnessed a very inappropriate, intoxicated cousin getting encircled and taken out of the party to sober up in a different room. Although I'm not particularly fond of group mentalities, they ultimately saved my life because my parents' actions left them feeling quite ashamed. They basically gave up, stating they had no explanation and were sincerely attempting to win my favor. They were unable to even come up with a decent defense for what they had done to me without coming out as even worse individuals. Even though many of you are thanking my family for their assistance, I'm fairly certain that they did so primarily out of embarrassment. With the exception of 2 years due to COVID, they attended the most of those 8 birthdays. During the remaining 6, they did nothing. They remained silent despite their disapproving expressions as my sister blew out my candles. Why? My dad is the son of my grandfather, who is the head of the family and quite the scary individual. If you stay on his good side, he will go to any lengths to assist you. The entire family will despise you if you get on his wrong side. My grandfather essentially told them that they were all to blame for not helping me for years, which is one of the main reasons I dislike group mentalities. As a result, they felt embarrassed and contributed to the cost of my automobile. They didn't need to give much each to fund it because they have so many relatives. When I registered the car in my name, I had the receipt. After paying $2,000 for it, they added more money for tires and other parts. I watched my granddad change the fluids and give it a tune-up. My grandmother gave the interior a thorough cleaning. Even though I'm incredibly grateful to them all, I still want to put some distance between us. I need time to sort things out on my own, and I'm not going to see my folks until Christmas or Thanksgiving. My sister has also been likened by some to the South Park character Eric Cartman, and the similarities are striking. My sister's obesity is a result of my parents' heavy junk food consumption. She detests consuming any nutritious food. She once added gummy bears to mashed potatoes, as I witnessed. My stomach turns at the notion of ingesting the mixture. She also spent a lot of time in the restroom due to her bad diet. To address that, my parents had to purchase fiber snacks for her to consume, and I don't think they were inexpensive to purchase, the ones that tasted nice. In addition to being incredibly dictatorial, my sister also wants to feel in control. She gave me directions almost all the time, so I used to lock myself in my room to avoid her. Because she was so demanding and domineering, she lost a lot of friends, and my parents would often tell her that the other kids were just envious of how unique she was. My sister used to call herself a princess quite a bit, and her huge meltdowns when she didn't get her way do remind me of Eric Cartman. I am aware that my sister is also not a moron. She received a C average in school and makes very little effort. She could easily have received all as if she had put in more effort. Edit 2. It appears that the subreddit has banned me. I'm not sure what I did, although it might have been a lengthy post. Either way, I'm out of time to respond to comments. Apologies, but from the bottom of my heart, I want to thank everyone who has given me great feedback. I'm grateful to everyone. Second update regarding my parents' 8 years of celebrating my sister's birthday. It's been, what, a year? I assumed I was done here, so I didn't log back in for a while. However, one day I decided to just log back in, thinking nothing of it, and saw that there were multiple private messages requesting updates. I'll provide one then. The information I'm about to share with you is largely compiled from stories my parents and grandparents taught me, so please bear in mind that I'm merely recounting what I learned. Sure, I'm doing great, but my parents and younger sister aren't in the same situation. Sometime after my last entry, my sister made multiple attempts to leave the boarding school. She tried to do nothing at all when her deceit and scheming failed to bring her anything. However, that was unsuccessful. Next, she attempted a fast. She declared that unless our parents came and took her home, she would not eat anything. My father had to intervene and tell my mother that my sister's actions were their responsibility, even though she was on the verge of jumping in the car to go save her baby. Before her 2-day hunger strike ever had a chance to last, my sister was clamoring for food in the cafeteria. Since a pediatrician had informed my parents that my sister, Little Miss Sunshine, was at risk of developing diabetes in the future and possibly experiencing growth stunting if she didn't control her weight and eat foods that provided the right nutrients, she wasn't allowed to have sweets or snacks unless they were healthy. That is, gummy bears on mashed potatoes are out. Naturally, my sister attempted to intimidate the other boarding school girls, but they refused to put up with her. She got into a fight one day and was severely assaulted after being targeted by several girls at once, and together they kicked her until a teacher broke them apart. My sister was scraped and bruised all over, but she didn't have any major injuries. Indeed, she placed the blame anywhere but on herself, and from what I've heard, she even said the other girls should follow her lead. They avoided her because they didn't. She reportedly threw quite the fit over it. It was mentally unimaginable for her to not obtain what she wanted because she had been obstructive to everyone for so long. My sister was exposed to junk food that my mother had been sneaking to her while she was at boarding school. My mother didn't try to sneak her any more junk food when the jig was up, despite my parents' intense argument. My sister used to be addicted to junk food and still is. Yes, she hasn't really altered in the last year. Do any of you find this surprising? I'm not. She's only marginally improved since she's come to terms with the notion that she's not the center of the universe. After just a few months at boarding school, her plots to escape only become more elaborate. In an attempt to get her way, she turned to self-harm. In the cafeteria, she managed to get her hands on a knife and proceeded to threaten herself with it while standing on a table, demanding candy and being sent home. Yes, she wanted candy in addition to being sent home. In my initial post, I did mention that I had witnessed her adding gummy bears to mashed potatoes, since our parents could only persuade her to eat the food she didn't like by adding gummy bears to it. Her favorite thing to do was put them on it. Can you picture salad topped with gummy bears? Whenever we ate, she would frequently bring a bag of gummy bears to the table, which kind of negates the purpose of salad. Even the sight of gumball bears triggers memories for me. At some point, my sister slipped and fell off the table while they were trying to talk her down and offered her any sweets they could find. She suffered a concussion to her forehead, shattered her left arm, and broke her collarbone in the next fall. After she left the hospital, even the boarding school decided they had had enough of her and didn't want her to come back. Her attempt to take her life really put her in a children's mental health facility, which was a terrible place for her to end up. She was brought up to have a strong case of narcissism, which has led to her being forced into therapy. Unless my parents take her out, she is not allowed to leave the ward. They have also made her adhere to a very rigorous, nutritious diet and to finish her education from that point on. She might as well have called it her personal hell. My father and mother got into a heated argument over my mother's desire to go to the hospital and get her beautiful baby out. She struck him during that altercation with the closest object she could reach, which just so happened to be a bottle that was resting on the kitchen counter. The bottle shattered on his face, causing a cheekbone crack and severe cuts. After the police were called, my mother had to be hauled away in the back of a police car, and he had to be transported to the hospital. My mother had to face her own intense wishes to support my sister, which led to her undergoing a psychological evaluation and committing for several months. It turns out that the cause is severe mental traumas my mother experienced as a child, but no one else is aware of this or is willing to share it with me. My parents have discussed splitting up in the past, but they haven't gone any farther than just sleeping in different bedrooms. My 19th birthday was not too long ago, as for me. At a restaurant they know I enjoy, my grandparents hosted a celebration for me. Both of my parents and sister were present. When she was given a little period of time outside the ward, I could see the utter resentment in her eyes. She sat there, exactly as she had been, her lips twisted, staring at me as if she intended to set me on fire. Since she hadn't been permitted junk food for so long, she had already lost a good amount of weight by then, and her diet plan would last for a while. The junk food at my birthday celebration was actually the first she'd had in a while. She was still unable to tolerate not being the focus of attention, though. She didn't scream when I blew out my candles this time. Rather, she burst into ugly tears. Right now, I can tell you that this was just another one of her devious tactics. She was just sobbing and asking repeatedly, why? Though she's just 9, I recall that the previous year, at 8, she insisted on having a car of her own since I had been given one when I was 18. At 15, she will even be unable to obtain a learner's permit. My sister threw a fit when I turned 19 and said there was no pizza, no presents for her, no prizes, nothing. She then began to swear at our parents and attempted to hurriedly leave the restaurant. In a twisted manner, she was essentially attempting to replicate what I had done the previous year. You can argue that I'm overanalyzing the situation, but I know my sister, and she will act in a way that she believes would satisfy her desires. After apologizing to everyone, my sister's parents brought her home early, but not before my granddad approached them and introduced himself. My grandmother later provided me with some information. He warned them that if they don't stop for good, this will never end, and they should avoid taking my sister to another party or giving in to her requests. After that, my sister understood her tantrums were ineffective and was hauled out kicking and screaming. The following morning she was driven back to the ward, and that is where she remains, still. I don't know how long she will stay here. Though she's still little, she's the most disobedient child I've ever met. She probably won't change until she hits her lowest point, and in the interim, she'll be stuck in a situation where her expectations aren't met. This past year, no one has tried to place any guilt on me, not even my parents, for what my sister did. They've had to admit that I didn't do anything wrong, even though they brought up my narcissistic sister. Another kind of addiction is supporting a narcissist. Other than narcissism, my sister has not been diagnosed with any mental problems, based on what I have seen and heard. She is actually smarter than I am. I understand that she scored about 110 on an IQ test. She simply doesn't enjoy working hard unless there is a benefit to her. She was brought up in this manner. Therefore, I predict it will take years for her to change. Personally, I'm managing rather nicely on my own. I acknowledge that I had to learn how to manage my finances and take care of all of my personal needs. Even if becoming an adult is difficult, it is still 1,000 times better than my existence with my parents and sister. Edit. It has been pointed out that it is absurd that my sister is in a long-term ward for nothing more than narcissism. I acknowledge that it wouldn't ordinarily. I haven't been informed of any deeper diagnosis if there is one. I know there are things they withhold from me, and since I am not my sister's mom, I am unable to simply question the doctor. But in an effort to get her way, my sister may also be incredibly harmful to herself. In reality, her vow to cut herself to get out of boarding school was only one of several instances that went along like this. She has been forced to acknowledge that she is not a princess since entering the ward, but she still believes that she must do everything it takes to achieve her goals. When my parents refused to take me out for fast food after my 19th birthday, she threatened to hurt herself in a similar way and attempted to take her own life. Her go-to strategy is to bang her skull against a wall. My father reported this to the ward, even though my mother didn't want to. My sister is capable of self-harming as a form of emotional blackmail, but her attempts have decreased in only the last month. She also seems to lie, from what I understand, and claims that she was injured by her own doctors, but her accounts never make sense together. Thus, I suppose that pathological lying may also play a role in addition to narcissism. And the reason she's in a long-term ward is probably due to what I just said. Little Miss Sunshine is probably depending on the fact that if she were home, my parents would gradually give in to her demands once more and everything would simply return to as it was. Update 3. Learned more precise details about Little Miss Sunshine. I'm an idiot to begin with. Some of you questioned my assertion that my sister is smarter than I am, drew attention to inconsistencies in my posts, and other things. It was brought to my attention that, despite having a D&C average and math being my worst subject, I had frequently and erroneously reported my sister's age. I'm to blame for that. I generally just tell people that she's 10 years my junior, and I guess the years just kind of blended together when we spoke about her. This time, when I do the math on paper, My sister was first allowed to blow out my candles at the age of 3, so technically I was 8 when she was born in June. Since I am terrible at arithmetic, it doesn't help that I tried to keep certain information ambiguous or marginally incorrect in order to remain anonymous. In hindsight, though, this isn't entirely anonymous because my family members may read it and recognize me. I truly made a mistake, and my sister was the center of attention from the minute she was born. This goes beyond simple, envious elder brother nonsense. I became quite angry with my sister because, although she didn't get to blow out my candles until she was 3, she was celebrated in front of everyone on my birthdays as well. Imagine the birthday boy sitting there as his mother uses the occasion to show off to everyone by flaunting the baby in front of them. Until it was time for cake, my folks essentially ignored me. It wasn't a terrible recollection at the time because my grandparents made up the difference. They even said it made some sense because my mother was having such a difficult time with the pregnancy, and my sister had only been born a month earlier. However, that's how things transpired on my 9th birthday, and nobody mentioned or took action. Before anything truly happened for me on my 10th birthday, my parents essentially did the same thing and showed off all of my sister's newborn successes. Then there were some of my gifts, which were obviously toddler toys that my sister was the only one who used. They were referred to as supplementary gifts, and although my name was on them, I wasn't the intended recipient. Once more, nobody in the family voiced their opinion or took any action. Then things really started to go awful about the time I was 11. My sister's name appeared on several gifts, and my parents insisted that Little Miss Sunshine be permitted to blow out my candles. They all witnessed, but none of them took any action. After that, my sister was the focus of all birthday celebrations, and occasionally she was even permitted to assist me in opening my gifts. They basically wanted me to play caterer. It wasn't assistance. Multiply all of that by the time I turned 18, and you'll see why I eventually lost it on everyone. For this reason, even though I claim that my birthday was taken over for 8 years, it was actually more like 10. For me, it was no longer enough that my parents acknowledged their mistakes. I try to pretend like I can forgive them after that, but I'm not sure I will ever be able to. I was also informed by someone else that a person cannot be diagnosed as a narcissist until they are 18. I contacted my father this morning and talked to him about it because I'm not very knowledgeable about this kind of thing, and I just accepted his word for it. When he originally asked how I knew, I merely Googled the answer. He sighed and acknowledged that although my sister was exhibiting symptoms, an official diagnosis cannot yet be established. She may be exhibiting future NPD and other issues. However, there's also a good chance that my mother has a mental illness that they won't identify for me. My mother was diagnosed with the aforementioned disease and post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, a few months ago, which my mother refuses to discuss. My parents have now acknowledged this. I'm not requesting it from her either, since whatever it is, it's not good. My father became irate and told me that my sister's problems are theirs, not mine. When I questioned him about why I had been given such basic information and outright lies, he simply assumed that if he told me that, I would accept it. Then he remarked, "They should be the ones concerned about my sister. I should just concentrate on my future and move on from dealing with Little Miss Sunshine." Regretfully, it's among the most sensible things he's ever said to me. Regarding Little Miss Sunshine, it is unclear how long she will remain in that ward. However, someone else pointed me in the direction of this, so I had another question for my father. Has my sister ever mentioned that she would like to kill me while I'm there? The response was very equivocal. Though I was at fault, my sister places more of the blame on our parents. Her fundamental grievance with me sprang from her conviction that what was rightfully hers was mine, and vice versa. She's even envious that I now live in my own place. That sparked further angry outbursts and demands from people who wanted the same things I did. She was permitted to be at my 19th birthday, because therapy has gradually lessened her anger. But she acted out even more aggressively that day. Have you ever witnessed a little child call anything mine? My sister has a mine complex around my birthday, and my parents are solely to blame for that. Since it has always been that way for as long as she can remember, my sister did and still feels that she is entitled to my birthday. She freaked out this year, for the same reason she yelled last year. My birthday has always been hers, in her mind. My sister's treatment will take a long time, and there's no assurance that she will ever fully recover, according to my parents, who have requested that I kindly leave the issue alone. My mother is currently receiving therapy and taking medication for her own problem, which frequently causes her to feel lethargic. When she was briefly placed in a ward after striking my father with a bottle, she managed to keep her work. Despite the lesser income and potential demotion, her boss is a very kind person and permitted my mother to work from home after she returned. I wanted to make clear one more thing that I didn't include in my previous post. This year, my birthday fell on a different day than my actual birthday. Rather, We commemorated the day of my belated birthday celebration from the previous year, which suits me well because I will always find the real day of my birthday offensive. In essence, I was born at the end of July. August was the month of the belated birthday, and that's the day I want to commemorate going forward. And lastly, I get asked all the time how I'm doing. I was doing all right, if not rather well. I'll confess that becoming an adult and learning how to handle my finances and pay my expenses hasn't been easy, but I'm good. Then, for some reason, returning to Reddit to discuss this has caused me to become anxious and, I guess, mentally relapse. I'm not certain. I used to think I was fine, but now I'm constantly on edge and pessimistic. I was even sent home early by my supervisor as a result of it. Even though they are fully aware of my past, I still feel awful. My heart was racing just from drinking coffee this morning. I believe I'll have to look into getting free counseling or anything from my local support organizations. After all, I'm on a budget, but for now, I'm just attempting to unwind and forget about the outside world. I might not, but if I come back here someday, I might be freaked up like this again. I appreciate everyone that has read my posts and can relate to my suffering. You guys are great, but I really must pull myself together and move on from my past. Edit. Whoa. After reading my post again, I believe I made another math error regarding the birth date of my sister. I didn't bother proofreading it much because I typed the entire dang thing too quickly. My supervisor told me to take a sick day because I've been such a hot mess today. Stress alone caused me to throw up this morning, and I've had a pounding headache ever since. I spent much of my time just lying in bed and frequently going in and out of the shower. I'm just now beginning to feel better. I never would have told the world if I had realized that it would make me feel this way. Furthermore, last night, without anyone even letting me know about it, I came upon another post from just a few weeks ago, in which the author, who had parents as horrible as mine, described how they sliced into their older child's cake, which they had paid for themselves, simply because their own Little Miss Sunshine begged for a piece. The parents decided to cut into their cake the night before because their golden child, who I believe was around my sister's age, had screamed out for the cake. After all, the older child had bought for their own personalized cake and celebration. I don't blame the OP at all if she decided to cancel the party altogether. However, after reading about similar articles and realizing that my parents are not unique, there are far too many parents out there who are just like mine, parents that remain the same at their core while only changing through embarrassment. I'm heading to my grandparents to discuss the situation after going to VLC with my folks. I'm not sure if I'll want to leave another comment or even make another post here. I actually detest checking my mailbox. I might not return to Reddit because I need a vacation.